60 Japanese fighters, 2 Americans, half-empty guns. What happened next is the greatest air battle you've never heard of. 60 Japanese aircraft swarm toward the American fleet. His ammunition drums are half-empty. His wingman is the only other fighter at altitude. Standard procedure says, wait for reinforcements, maintain formation, don't engage outnumbered. Instead, he climbs into the sun, rolls inverted, and dives straight into the center of the enemy formation at a speed that turns his Hellcat into a screaming missile. What happens in the next 18 minutes will produce one of the greatest combat performances in aviation history. Dawn, October 24th, 1944. The Philippine Sea is waking to war. The skies above Leyte Gulf belong to the Japanese. American carriers steam in vulnerable formations, launching fighters in waves that follow doctrines refined through 2 years of Pacific combat. The tactics are proven, systematic, coordinated, and they depend on having enough fighters in the air to execute them. But on this morning, the radar screens aboard the USS Essex tell a different story. A massive enemy strike is inbound. Dozens of fighters, dozens of bombers, enough firepower to cripple a carrier group. Before we dive into this story, subscribe and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Every view helps bring more stories like this to life. The Combat Information Center counts friendly aircraft aloft, then counts again. The math is unforgiving. Most American fighters are too low, too slow, or too far away to intercept in time. The fleet's survival depends on fighters that aren't there yet. The Japanese formation knows this. They have learned to read American response times. When carrier radar picks up an incoming raid, the standard defensive scramble takes 12 minutes minimum. The attackers count on that window. They organize their assault around that certainty. It is mathematics. It is rehearsed. It is working. The losses have been mounting across the Philippine campaign. Command knows it. The air groups know it, but procedures exist for good reasons. And individual heroics are not a tactical doctrine. There is a rhythm to fleet defense, and improvisation creates gaps. Then 2 American fighters already at altitude make a decision no doctrine covers. They do not wait for the squadron to form up. They do not orbit for additional support. They push throttles forward and climb straight toward an enemy formation 10 times their size. They use altitude like currency and speed like a blade, and they intend to come back alive. The first time Commander David McCampbell tried this approach, other pilots questioned whether it qualified as real air combat. The second time, squadron leaders suggested he was taking unnecessary risks. By the third time, he had stopped explaining himself. His name is David S. McCampbell. Everyone calls him Commander because he carries authority the way other men carry swagger. He has steel blue eyes, a farmer's discipline, and a tactical philosophy that makes fighter jocks uncomfortable. He does not argue about doctrine. He simply keeps winning. He was born in Alabama in 1910, raised in Florida in a world of humidity and modest expectations. His father worked in construction. His mother taught him that competence matters more than flash. There was no money for theatrics, no patience for shortcuts. You studied. You practiced. You delivered results. McCampbell learned to fly in Pensacola on training aircraft that demanded precision. He went solo after the standard curriculum. The instructors noted his hands were smooth and his discipline was exceptional. He did not showboat. He did not cut corners. He flew the way other men filed reports, correctly. In 1938, he received his wings and entered the long, unglamorous middle section of a naval career. He served on cruisers, then in training commands, then in administrative billets. He flew patrols, then instructors' demos, then more patrols. He adapted to each assignment the way a machinist adapts to a new lathe. No fanfare, no resistance. His personnel file from those years is unremarkable. Standard fitness reports, routine qualifications, no flags. But his squadron mates noticed something. After every training flight, he would linger near the aircraft, running through the mission in his head, asking the crew chiefs technical questions, not about maintenance, about performance. How did the engine respond to throttle cuts at altitude? Did the control surfaces give warning before a stall? What happened to turn radius above 20,000 feet? He was not debriefing. He was mapping. By 1943, he was commanding Air Group 15 aboard the USS Essex. His kill count grew methodically. No dramatic radio calls, no victory rolls. He fired disciplined bursts, broke clean, and returned with fuel to spare. He logged victories the way an accountant logs receipts, accurately and without commentary. Other pilots respected his consistency. He never boasted. He never flinched. He had the kind of calm that comes from solving problems in 3 dimensions while anti-aircraft fire brackets your wings. But it was his brutal high-speed diving attacks that made him notorious. While other aces maneuvered for turning engagements, McCampbell would position himself high, identify a target, and then plunge like a stone thrown from a cathedral. He would rip through enemy formations at speeds that made his airframe scream, fire a 2-second burst at point-blank range, and zoom back to altitude on pure kinetic energy before the enemy could rotate to engage. It looked primitive. It looked like physics, not flying. It worked. The fighter community called it the Caveman dive. No elegance, no artistry, just altitude converted to violence. They mocked it in ready rooms. They said it violated the principles of energy conservation, of mutual support, of controlled engagement. McCampbell listened, nodded politely, and kept diving. He understood something they refused to accept. In aerial combat, the pilot who strikes first usually strikes last, the one who controls the vertical controls the fight. But McCampbell's path to this moment was anything but inevitable. He almost never became a fighter pilot at all. He was born in Bessemer, Alabama in 1910, then raised in West Palm Beach, Florida, flat country where ambition meant steady work and dependability meant more than flash. His father managed construction projects. His mother ran the household with quiet efficiency. There was no military tradition in the family, no dynasty of warriors, no expectation of glory. You learned a trade. You showed up. You earned respect through results, not rhetoric. McCampbell was reserved by nature, disciplined by upbringing. He did not chase attention. He solved problems. When he decided to attend the Naval Academy, it was not because he dreamed of aerial dogfights over foreign seas. It was because Annapolis offered structure, education, and a clear path forward. He graduated in 1933 with solid marks and no particular distinction. The Navy assigned him to cruisers. He served competently. He learned navigation, gunnery, the rhythms of fleet operations. It was respectable work. It was not combat aviation. When he finally entered flight training in 1937, he was already 27, older than most naval aviators, without the fire-breathing reputation of the rising stars. He completed the syllabus methodically. He earned his wings in 1938. Then the Navy assigned him to shore duty, then training commands, then administrative billets. By 1940, as war clouds gathered over Europe and the Pacific, David McCampbell had logged hundreds of flight hours and exactly 0 combat missions. He was a qualified naval aviator, stuck in the slow lane of peacetime career progression. Younger pilots were being fast-tracked to carrier squadrons. McCampbell was teaching instrument flying in Florida and reviewing logistics reports. He did not complain. He did not lobby for reassignment. He showed up every day and flew the training missions and filed the paperwork and waited. The attack on Pearl Harbor changed the calculus. Suddenly, the Navy needed every pilot it could certify for combat. McCampbell was recalled to operational duty in 1942, 32 years old, untested, starting his frontline career at an age when other aces were already legendary. He was assigned to carrier operations, then to Air Group 15 as a division leader, then, improbably, to command of the entire air group aboard the USS Essex. Not because he had a flashy record, but because he had something rarer, unshakable competence. His fellow pilots noticed immediately that he was different. He did not drink heavily. He did not chase glory. He studied aircraft performance manuals the way other men studied racing forms. In briefings, he asked technical questions about power curves and dive angles, while others debated kill counts and tactics. He flew the way he had lived, methodically, without waste, with an engineer's attention to efficiency. He did not seek the spotlight. He sought the edge. And somewhere between the peacetime training flights and the brutal crucible of Pacific combat, he found it. By mid-1944, McCampbell had quietly become one of the most effective fighter pilots in the U.S. Navy. Not the loudest, not the most celebrated, but the one you wanted on your wing when the numbers turned bad. While other pilots practiced graceful turning engagements, McCampbell was calculating energy equations. The prevailing fighter doctrine in 1943 emphasized maneuverability, tight turns, sustained dogfights, the kind of swirling aerial duels that looked dramatic in gun camera footage and made for excellent ready-room stories. Pilots prided themselves on out-turning the enemy, on staying in the fight, on winning through superior handling at the edge of a stall. McCampbell watched these engagements and saw inefficiency. A turning fight burned fuel. It burned speed. It gave the enemy time to call for help, time to coordinate, time to reverse the advantage. Worse, it placed both aircraft in the same energy state. Slow, vulnerable, committed. In a 2 versus 1 or 3 versus 1 scenario, the heroic turner usually died heroically. McCampbell studied a different geometry. He read engineering reports on the F-6F Hellcat's dive characteristics. He memorized power-to-weight ratios. He calculated terminal velocity and structural limits. He began to see altitude not as a tactical position, but as stored energy, potential that could be converted instantly into something the enemy could not counter. Overwhelming speed. The tactic he developed was almost insultingly simple. Climb high. Position yourself above and behind the enemy formation. Roll inverted. Push the stick forward. Dive at speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour. Fire a 2-second burst at point-blank range, close enough to see rivets. Then use the momentum from the dive to zoom climb back to altitude before the enemy could react, reorient, or retaliate. It was physics, not finesse. Gravity doing the work, energy management at its most brutal. He practiced it relentlessly, alone, at altitude, burning fuel to perfect the angles. How steep could he dive without overstressing the airframe? How much speed could he bleed in the climb-out? What was the minimum firing range that guaranteed a kill without risking collision? His squadron mates noticed, and they hated it. "It isn't real flying," one pilot said after watching McCampbell's gun camera footage. The attack lasted 4 seconds. The enemy aircraft disintegrated. There was no maneuvering, no drama, just vertical violence. "It's barbaric," another offered. "You're not fighting. You're just dropping on them." The nickname stuck. The Caveman dive. Primitive, inelegant, something a Neanderthal with a rock would devise if you gave him an airplane. McCampbell heard it all. In the ready room, in the officers' mess, in the casual asides when squadron assignments were posted. The implication was clear. What he was doing did not qualify as real air combat. It was a trick, a gimmick, unsporting. He never argued, never defended himself in briefings, never wrote rebuttals or delivered lectures on energy tactics. He simply nodded, absorbed the criticism, and went back to refining the technique. Because he knew something they did not want to accept. In combat, there are no style points. There is only alive and dead, fast and slow, first shot and last breath. And when the odds turned impossible, when the radar screens filled with hostile contacts and the fleet's survival hung on minutes, McCampbell's barbaric caveman trick would prove to be the most sophisticated combat technique in naval aviation. They would stop laughing soon enough. June 19, 1944. The Philippine Sea west of Guam. The largest carrier battle of the Pacific War is about to unfold, and David McCampbell is finally going to prove his critics wrong. The Japanese launched a massive strike, hundreds of aircraft aimed at the American carriers. It was a desperate gamble, throwing their remaining naval air power against Task Force 58 in a single, overwhelming assault. American intelligence called it a turkey shoot before it even began. The F-6F Hellcat outclassed most Japanese fighters in speed, firepower, and durability. The outcome seemed inevitable. But inevitable and easy are not the same thing. McCampbell launched with Air Group 15 into a sky crowded with hostile contacts. The formations dissolved almost immediately into a sprawling furball. Exactly the kind of chaotic turning engagement he had spent 2 years learning to avoid. Dozens of aircraft swirling, burning fuel, trading angles, committing to fights that would last until someone ran out of airspeed or ammunition. McCampbell climbed. While other pilots dove into the scrum below, he pushed his Hellcat to 20,000 feet, positioned himself with the sun at his back, and began working. One dive, one target, one kill. Zoom back to altitude, reset, repeat. The Japanese pilots never saw him coming. He would appear as a dark streak from above, fire would flash, an aircraft would erupt in flames, and he would be gone, already climbing for the next attack. No prolonged engagement, no wasted motion, just precision converted to wreckage. By the time he landed back on the Essex, his guns were empty and his fuel gauge hovered near zero. The intelligence officer debriefed him and tallied the gun camera footage. 7 confirmed kills, in one mission, in one day. An ace in a day, a feat most pilots never achieved across an entire career. The ready room went quiet when the numbers were announced. Some pilots offered congratulations with genuine respect. Others said nothing, their expressions carefully neutral. McCampbell had just validated a technique they had mocked for months, and the evidence was undeniable. But what unsettled them more than his success was his reaction to it. McCampbell did not celebrate. He did not bask in the achievement or demand recognition. He sat in the debriefing room with his notes and asked the intelligence officer to replay specific segments of his gun camera footage. "The third pass," he said. "I think I dove too steeply, burned more speed than I needed." He was already refining it, already identifying inefficiencies, already preparing for the next mission. Over the following weeks, he repeated the performance. Not 7 kills, but consistent results. 2 here, 3 there, each mission executed with the same brutal precision. His kill count climbed steadily while his fuel consumption and ammunition expenditure remained among the lowest in the air group. The mockery stopped. In its place came something quieter and more dangerous. Envy from some, awe from others. By late summer, McCampbell was the leading U.S. Navy ace in the Pacific theater. His method had been proven not once, but dozens of times. The Caveman dive was no longer a joke. It was becoming doctrine. Yet McCampbell sensed that everything so far had been preparation. The real test, the moment that would define his entire career, was still ahead. He did not know when it would come, only that he would be ready. October 24th, 1944, dawn over the Philippine Sea. Life aboard the USS Essex had settled into the tense routine of combat operations, launch cycles, patrol rotations, maintenance schedules. The Battle of Leyte Gulf was entering its second day. The American invasion of the Philippines was underway. The Japanese Navy was responding with everything it had left, which meant the carriers were targets. At 0730 hours, the Combat Information Center picked up the first radar contacts. Small blips at extreme range, approaching from the direction of Luzon. The watch officer noted them, tracked them, waited for clarification. The blips multiplied. Within minutes, the radar screen showed not a patrol or a probe, but a formation. Large, organized, and accelerating toward the fleet. The CIC officer picked up the handset and called the bridge. His voice was calm, but the words carried weight. Massive inbound strike, multiple groups, estimated 60-plus aircraft. On the flight deck, the controlled chaos of a carrier at war intensified. Handlers scrambled to position aircraft for launch. Plane captains fired up engines. Pilots sprinted toward their fighters, flight gear half-fastened, charts forgotten. But launch cycles take time. Catapults can only throw so many aircraft so fast. And the enemy formation was closing at 200 knots. Commander David McCampbell was already airborne. He had launched 30 minutes earlier on a routine combat air patrol with his wingman, Ensign Roy Rushing. They were at 18,000 feet, orbiting northwest of the fleet. When the alert came over the radio, McCampbell keyed his mic. "Buster, what's the count?" The response from the Essex was clipped. "Estimate 60 bandits inbound. Composition unknown. You and Rushing are the only fighters at altitude." McCampbell glanced at his fuel gauge. Enough for maybe 40 minutes of combat maneuvering. He checked his ammunition counters. The mechanic's warning echoed in his mind. Not a full load. Enough for perhaps a dozen bursts if he was disciplined. He looked down. Far below, the American carriers were turning into the wind, preparing to launch reinforcements. But the launch would take 8 minutes minimum. The Japanese strike would arrive in 6. The mathematics were brutal. 60 enemy aircraft, 2 American fighters, a fleet with no defensive screen. Below them, the ships understood. 5-inch gun crews swung their mounts toward the horizon. Fire control radars began sweeping. Damage control parties closed watertight doors and prepared for the worst. On the carrier decks, aircraft handlers worked with desperate speed to clear the landing areas, because wounded aircraft would be coming back, and there would be no time for second chances. McCampbell watched the enemy formation materialize on the horizon. A dark line against the morning sky, growing larger. Fighters high, bombers stacked below, torpedo planes coming in low over the water. A coordinated assault designed to saturate and overwhelm. Rushing's voice crackled over the radio, steady, but with an edge. "Skipper, you seeing this?" McCampbell checked his gun sight, verified his wingman's position, calculated the geometry, altitude, closure rate, approach angle. Every second of hesitation gave the enemy another mile closer to the fleet. He keyed the mic. "Let's go get him." 2 Hellcats rolled into a climbing turn, pushing throttles to full power, angling toward an enemy force 30 times their size. McCampbell pushed his Hellcat higher, climbing above 22,000 feet. The sun was a weapon now. He positioned himself so that anyone looking up from below would be staring into a blinding white glare. Invisible. Untouchable. The enemy formation stretched beneath him like a parade ground formation, neat and lethal. 60 aircraft. Maybe more. Zeros and Zeeks providing top cover. Val dive bombers in the middle layers. Kate torpedo bombers skimming low, already dropping toward attack altitude. It was textbook. Coordinated, disciplined, exactly the kind of strike that had crippled carriers at Coral Sea and Midway. McCampbell's voice came over the radio, calm as a training flight. "Rushing, I'm going in. Cover my climb out." "Roger, skipper." He rolled the Hellcat inverted, pointed the nose at the earth, and pushed. The airframe screamed. Wind shrieked across the canopy. The altimeter unwound like a broken clock. 20,000 feet, 18,000, 15,000. His airspeed indicator climbed past 350 knots, then 400, the controls stiffening as aerodynamic pressure mounted. The Japanese formation grew larger in his windscreen. Individual aircraft resolved from the mass. He picked his target, a Zero flying top cover, unaware, scanning the horizon for threats that moved horizontally. McCampbell opened fire at 200 yards. The 650 caliber machine guns hammered. Tracers converged. The Zero's canopy shattered, then the engine cowling disintegrated, and then the entire aircraft erupted in a fireball that tumbled through the formation like a flaming comet. McCampbell did not watch it fall. He was already pulling back on the stick, hauling the Hellcat out of the dive, converting 400 knots of airspeed into altitude. The G-forces crushed him into his seat. Gray edges crept into his vision. But the aircraft climbed. 6,000 feet, 8,000, 10,000. Momentum carrying him back above the enemy formation before they understood what had happened. Below, chaos rippled through the Japanese ranks. Pilots craned their necks, searching for the threat. Some broke formation, others tightened up, instinctively defensive. Rushing dove from a different angle. Another Zero exploded. The formation fractured further. McCampbell rolled over for the second dive. Another target, another screaming descent, another 2-second burst at point-blank range. Another enemy fighter disintegrating in midair. Climb, reset, attack. The Japanese had never encountered this. Their doctrine prepared them for turning fights, for coordinated attacks, for enemies who engaged on the same geometric plane. But this vertical hammer striking from above with physics-driven violence, this was outside their training, outside their experience. Some pilots panicked. Others tried to climb to meet the threat, but bled their speed doing it, turning themselves into stationary targets. The formation's integrity collapsed. What had been a coordinated strike force became a scattered mob of aircraft trying simultaneously to defend themselves, maintain formation, and continue toward their targets. It was impossible. McCampbell had made it impossible. Third dive, third kill. A bomber this time, flames pouring from its wing root as it spiraled toward the sea. Rushing scored again, then again. Far below, officers in the Essex's CIC listened to the radio chatter and watched their radar displays in disbelief. The enemy formation was breaking apart. Individual contacts were peeling away, diving for the deck, fleeing back toward Luzon. 2 fighters, 2 men, and the Caveman dive, mocked, dismissed, called barbaric by pilots who prized elegance over results, was tearing the heart out of a Japanese strike force. The mockery was over. 4th dive. McCampbell's Hellcat shuddered as he pushed past 420 knots. The control stick felt like it was bolted to concrete. A Kate torpedo bomber filled his gun sight, huge, vulnerable, laden with ordnance. He pressed the trigger. The guns roared. The Kate's fuel tank detonated in an orange-white flash that momentarily blinded him. He yanked back on the stick, pulling 7 Gs, his vision tunneling to a pinpoint as blood drained from his brain. Climb. Breathe. Reset. The radio crackled with frantic Japanese voices. Orders, warnings, panic. 5th dive. A Zero tried to turn into him. Too late. Too slow. McCampbell walked across the fuselage from spinner to tail. The fighter snapped inverted and fell away, trailing smoke. His ears rang from the guns. His flight suit was soaked with sweat. The acrid smell of cordite filled the cockpit. Every muscle ached from the repeated G-loads. Pull out, climb, roll over, repeat. His body was a machine executing a pattern it had practiced 1,000 times. 6th kill. A Val dive bomber. Its rear gunner never got a shot off. The aircraft simply came apart, pieces tumbling through the sky like confetti. Rushing's voice cut through the radio. "Skipper, 6! I got 6! Stay high, keep hitting them." The Japanese formation no longer existed as a formation. It was a scattered swarm of aircraft, some trying to press the attack, most breaking away in survival turns. The neat geometric rows had dissolved into chaos. Bombers jettisoned their payloads into empty ocean. Fighters dove for the deck. The coordinated strike, planned for weeks, rehearsed, executed with precision, had shattered in less than 4 minutes. 7th dive. McCampbell's ammunition counters were dropping into the red. Maybe 3 bursts left, maybe 4. He picked a Zero that was climbing, trying to regain altitude, trying to fight back. The burst was shorter this time. He couldn't afford to waste rounds. The Zero's engine seized, belching black smoke, and the aircraft nosed over into a death spiral. His arms trembled on the stick. The sun was higher now, the glare fierce. Sweat stung his eyes. He blinked it away and searched for the next target. 8th. A bomber trying to escape low over the water. McCampbell dove nearly vertical, overshooting his target speed, the airframe groaning in protest. He fired. The bomber's wing folded. It cartwheeled into the sea in a geyser of white spray. His ammunition counters read nearly empty. Maybe 1 burst remaining, maybe less. 9th dive. Another Zero. This one diving away, trying to run. McCampbell followed it down, falling like a stone, firing his last rounds in a final desperate burst. Tracers converged. The Zero's cockpit exploded. The fighter disintegrated. The guns clicked empty, silence in the wings. McCampbell pulled out of the dive at 8,000 feet and scanned his instruments. Fuel gauge, critical. Ammunition, gone. Engine temperature, climbing. He looked around. The sky was empty of threats. The Japanese formation, what remained of it, was fleeing west, scattered and broken. Below, the American fleet steamed on, untouched. McCampbell leveled off and checked his fuel gauge. The needle hovered just above empty. Not low. Empty. The kind of reading that meant minutes, not hours. Maybe 15 if he leaned the mixture and prayed. Maybe 10. He keyed the radio. "Rushing status?" "Low on everything, Skipper. Heading home." "Roger. Follow me in." McCampbell turned southeast toward the fleet. The ocean stretched beneath him, endless, indifferent, deep enough to swallow a fighter and leave no trace. His engine ran smooth for now, but fuel starvation would not announce itself with warning lights. The engine would simply cough once, twice, then quit. Then gravity would finish what the Japanese could not. He did the math. Distance to the Essex, 40 miles. Fuel remaining, unknown. Glide ratio, if the engine quit, roughly 10 miles from altitude. The numbers did not comfort him. For the first time that morning, doubt crept in. Not about the mission, that was done. About survival. About whether the greatest performance of his career would end with a quiet splash and a search plane finding nothing. He pushed the thought away. Discipline overrode fear. Always had. He monitored his instruments, adjusted his mixture, calculated his approach vector. If the engine quit, he would ditch as close to the fleet as possible. If it held, he would make the deck. Simple problems. Simple solutions. The fleet appeared on the horizon. The Essex was launching aircraft, its deck crowded with fighters preparing for combat air patrol. The landing signal officer waved him off before he even entered the pattern. No room, flight deck fouled, try another ship. McCampbell's fuel gauge was against the peg. He keyed the radio. Any carrier, any deck, I'm on fumes. The reply came immediately. Langley has the deck, vector 140, 3 miles. The USS Langley, a light carrier smaller than the Essex, with a shorter deck and less margin for error. McCampbell turned toward it, nursing his throttle, feeling the engine's vibration change subtly as it began sucking vapor from nearly empty tanks. 2 miles. The Langley grew larger. His engine coughed. Caught. Coughed again. 1 mile. He dropped his landing gear and flaps. The engine sputtered. He adjusted the mixture. Too rich and he'd flood it. Too lean and it would quit entirely. The deck. The LSO's paddles. Cut signal. McCampbell chopped throttle and dropped onto the deck harder than he intended. The tailhook snagged the wire. The Hellcat jerked to a stop. He sat in the cockpit for a moment, hands still on the stick, breathing. Deck crews swarmed the aircraft, chalking the wheels, signaling him to shut down. The plane captain climbed onto the wing and opened the engine cowling. Then he waved over the ordnance chief. They opened the ammunition bays and stared. 12 rounds remaining, total. Across all 6 guns, the fuel gauges read 0. The chief later estimated McCampbell had landed with less than 5 gallons in his tanks, barely enough to taxi. McCampbell climbed down from the cockpit, legs unsteady, flight suit dark with sweat. An intelligence officer approached with a notepad, already asking for the count. 9, McCampbell said. His voice was flat, matter-of-fact. Maybe 10, if you count a probable. The intelligence officer stopped writing. 9 confirmed? 9. Word spread across the deck within minutes. Crewmen gathered, staring at the battle-scarred Hellcat, at the nearly empty ammunition bays, at the man who had just rewritten the definition of impossible. The ready room aboard the USS Essex fell silent when the final tally came through. 9 confirmed kills. Commander David McCampbell. 6 confirmed kills. Ensign Roy Rushing. 15 enemy aircraft destroyed by 2 pilots. A 60-plane strike force shattered. An American carrier group saved. The intelligence officer read the numbers twice, as if expecting them to change. They did not. The gun camera footage confirmed every claim. The radar plots corroborated the chaos. The Japanese themselves would later acknowledge the catastrophic failure of their October 24th strike. McCampbell sat in a metal folding chair, still in his sweat-soaked flight suit, drinking coffee from a dented tin cup. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. When younger pilots approached to offer congratulations, he nodded politely and asked about their missions. How was the visibility? Were the Zeros climbing better at altitude? Had anyone noticed a change in Japanese tactics? He was already analyzing, already learning, already preparing for tomorrow. Rushing stood nearby, equally quiet, equally exhausted. The 2 men exchanged a glance, brief, wordless, complete. They had done something extraordinary together. No speeches were necessary. In the corner of the ready room, the pilots who had mocked the caveman dive said nothing. The evidence was irrefutable now. The tactic they had called barbaric, primitive, unsophisticated. It had just produced the most devastating single-mission performance in naval aviation history. The crude technique was, in fact, revolutionary. Physics-driven, repeatable, unbeatable when executed with discipline. Within weeks, McCampbell's methods would be incorporated into fighter doctrine across the Pacific Fleet. Tactical bulletins would analyze his energy management. Training commands would teach his vertical attacks. The caveman dive would become standard procedure. But that was later. McCampbell finished the war with 34 confirmed aerial victories, the highest tally of any U.S. Navy pilot in World War II. He received the Medal of Honor, the Navy Cross, the Distinguished Flying Cross, and a legacy that reshaped how naval aviators approached combat. Yet when asked about October 24, 1944, he never spoke of glory. He spoke of fundamentals, of energy management, of staying calm when the numbers turned bad. He gave credit to his wingman, to his aircraft, to the mechanics who kept his Hellcat flying. He never framed himself as a hero. He framed himself as a pilot who studied the problem, found a solution, and executed it when it mattered most. Because that is what David McCampbell's story is truly about. Not glory, but disciplined courage. Not genius, but mastery of fundamentals. Not bravado, but the quiet conviction to trust what you know when the entire world doubts you. The caveman dive was never primitive. It was the future. And the man they mocked became the standard by which all others were measured. After the war, McCampbell continued to serve in the Navy, eventually retiring as a captain in 1964. He lived quietly, rarely giving interviews, never seeking the spotlight. When he spoke at aviation events, he emphasized teamwork, preparation, and the importance of understanding your aircraft better than the enemy understood his. He passed away in 1996 at the age of 86. His legacy endures in every fighter pilot who climbs high, dives fast, and strikes before the enemy knows the fight has begun. The mockery is long forgotten. The legend remains. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each story matters. Each story deserves to be remembered, and we would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from. Our community spans continents and generations. From veterans to history enthusiasts, from students to scholars, you are part of something meaningful here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories